The Grave Guardian of Naples, a personal account. I'm a native of Naples, and I want to share the events I experienced as a lesson for all. In Naples, where I spent my childhood and youth, my father and I tried to make a living as cabinet makers. Since we were manufacturers, we earned good money, and thankfully, we never had a beg. In those years, my older brother, Robert, wanted to get married, but we could never save up the required money. Either some medical issue or an urgent household need would arise, and the money would go to waste. Finally, in 2002, my father retired. The money accumulated was paid out in cash. My father used about 8 months' worth of his salary, plus the money he got from selling our workshop, to marry off Robert. At the time, I never thought to ask, how will I get married when it's my turn? But the thought started to linger. A few years later, I realized that just working for someone else wasn't enough. Whatever I saved seemed to vanish. Forget getting married. I couldn't even afford decent clothes for myself. I had to contribute to the household budget, and Robert was barely managing to provide for his own home as a master carpenter. In 2004, a relative called. They were looking for furniture makers to work in Venice, building yachts and boats. The pay was high, and accommodation, food, and drink were all covered. However, I still had my military service ahead of me. Unfortunately, 3 months before I was due to enlist, the workshop I was working at closed down. I decided to use the money I'd saved to take an English course. My goal was to go to Venice to work after the military, develop myself, and maybe even set up my own yacht manufacturing business. I decided to enroll in the spring. After 3 months, I'd go into the military, and from there, directly to Venice. On the very first day of the course, I fell in love with Chloe. She was so beautiful, both warm and reserved, the one I had dreamed of for years. We were friends for about 3 months. As I was leaving for the military, I had to tell Chloe I loved her, but how? I had nothing to my name. When we met for farewell, all I could ask was, "Will you wait for me?" She smiled and said, "Yes," and that reserved girl came and hugged me. My heart was racing. I went to the military in Rome, constantly making plans. As soon as I got back, I met Chloe. Our friendship had turned into love. A few weeks later, I went to Venice, found a job, and started working. The pay was almost 3 times higher than in Naples, and accommodation and meals were provided. After working for about 2 years, I returned to Naples to ask for Chloe's hand. The engagement went smoothly. I worked for another year and saved up the money for the wedding. We had a splendid wedding in Naples. We rented a house and chose all our furniture, but I couldn't find work back home. It was essential for me to return to Venice to support my family. I went back and continued working. A month and a half later, I received happy news. Chloe was pregnant. We were going to have a baby. I started working with even more zeal. The foreman noticed me. "What's with the rush, son?" he asked. I said, "I'm going to be a father. I have to work hard." Chloe was in her 8th month of pregnancy, and I had only seen her in pictures. The foreman said, "Go home now, son. Let your child see his father. Go to your wife." I immediately jumped on a bus. On the way, I was imagining how I would surprise them. I didn't sleep all night. Around dawn, as I got off the bus at the Naples terminal, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. She was crying. "Mother, what happened?" I asked, instantly thinking of Chloe. "Come home immediately, son," she said and hung up. I tried calling my father and mother-in-law, but no one answered. I hailed a taxi and went straight home. Everything was blackened. My brother-in-law and Robert were outside. When they saw me, they hugged me. I felt terrible, unable to ask anything. I had constricted myself so tightly that I fainted. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My mother and father arrived later. Chloe, our unborn child, and my mother-in-law had tragically burned to death in a house fire. It was a huge devastation. The next day, we buried Chloe and the baby in her womb. We also laid my mother-in-law to rest beside her. Life just stopped. Months passed, but I still hadn't recovered. It was time to slowly start working again, as I was a burden on my family and needed to repair the house. I started a few jobs, but my hands wouldn't cooperate anymore. My work was flawed. I would quit because I could sense they wanted to let me go. I wanted to return to Venice, but I needed to recover first. No matter where I went, I just couldn't clear my head. Finally, I went to Venice. Unfortunately, I ruined a very expensive piece of material. Since they were my former employers, they didn't make a fuss, but after working for a while, they paid my salary and sent me away. After 2 months of unemployment, a friend who had gone into politics and gotten a position in the local council, Ben, heard about what happened. He called and politely offered me a job. When we sat down, he saw my interactions with people were strained, so he asked, "Would you like to be a cemetery watchman?" I said I would. He helped me with the applications, and a month later, I started the job. My first post was the cemetery where my Chloe and my unborn child lay. On my first day, I prayed at their graves. This was my first visit. I felt responsible for not protecting them. For the first few days, I worked with Ethan, a fellow watchman. We had a night shift colleague, Arthur, a strange man in his 60s. His hair was snow white, his face grim, and he rarely smiled. It turned out he had chosen the night shift for years to avoid people. We called him Old Arthur. We made tea in the security booth and sometimes chatted. I told Old Arthur what had happened and that my wife was buried here. "That must be hard for you," he said. "Yes, Abby," I said. "I wasn't with her when she was alive, and now I'm watching over her grave." About a month passed, and Old Arthur and I had become a good team. Then they put me on the night shift. On the first night, I went out to patrol. As I walked with my flashlight, I saw someone among the trees. I turned off my light and approached quietly. As if sensing me, they quickly disappeared. Who was that? They were just staring fixedly at one spot. Maybe it was someone who had lost a loved one and gone a bit mad. A week later, I saw someone through the window. I grabbed my flashlight. Ethan, my partner, followed me. The person disappeared as we ran. I walked quickly through the cemetery. Ahead, there was an empty, newly dug grave. As I approached it, I realized there was someone at the head of the grave. It was very dark. I couldn't turn to look. My heart pounding, I quickly ran away. In the booth, Ethan said my face was white. I tried to dismiss it, but he said, "If you saw what I saw, you wouldn't just be scared to go out, you wouldn't enter the cemetery again." A fear crept into me. I asked him what he'd seen. "I can't tell you," he said. "You quit this job and leave." I realized it wasn't a story. "It will confront you one day," he said. The next morning, I visited Chloe's grave. An empty grave had been dug right next to hers, the one I'd dreamed of being buried in. I cleaned around her grave and left. I fell asleep with great difficulty that evening. In my dream, a strange creature was standing at the head of Chloe's grave, and she got up, scared of it. When I woke up, I was still influenced by the dream. I went back to the cemetery. As I approached the empty grave next to Chloe's, a creature, just like the one in my dream, was standing at the head of the dug grave. I was so frightened. I had to drive it away, as Chloe was bothered by in my dream. The darkness had settled. I walked forward to make myself visible. When it noticed me, it lifted its head and looked. My steps quickened with fear. As I walked diagonally away, I turned for one last look. It was following me. The moment I turned back, it appeared right in front of me. I froze. It was 3 meters ahead. We stared at each other. Whichever way I turned, it turned that way too. As I slowly walked back, Ethan called out, "Mimnin!" With a sudden reflex, I turned around. When I looked back, the specter had vanished. Ethan asked why I was staring blankly. We walked to the booth. I thought about the creature. It looked like a human wearing a black cloak. Its face was snow white, and its eyes were pitch black. It was strange that it didn't do anything despite appearing. I couldn't settle down. I kept looking towards Chloe's grave. Suddenly, I saw a dark shadow there. I went out. As I walked towards the spot, I passed Chloe's grave and noticed a gap had formed on the tombstone. I continued towards the shadow. At the head of the last newly dug grave, there was that same gloomy-faced, pitch black-eyed, supernatural entity. My feet felt glued to the ground. I couldn't move. I slowly turned and walked away. Back at Chloe's grave, I approached the tombstone again. My foot slipped, and I fell into the empty grave next to it. I think I hit my head. When I came to, I was inside the grave, and that specter was standing over me. I thought I had died. As Ethan approached, calling out, "Mimnin!" the specter suddenly vanished. Ethan helped me out and was terrified. I went home the next morning. In my dream, Chloe got up and looked at the tombstone, and she wasn't pregnant. Why? Had they not buried the baby with her? Then the tombstone came to mind. That evening, old Arthur was back on the night shift. I told him about the dream. My wife wasn't pregnant in my dream. What? I asked. He suggested that since we had a name, Can, for the boy, I should have my unborn son's name written on Chloe's tombstone because he was a soul too. I turned to old Arthur and asked, I'm seeing a dark shadow. Are you seeing it too? He wasn't surprised. Yes, so you finally saw it too, he said. What is it? I asked. That's the grave guardian, he said. We are the cemetery watchmen. They're the grave guardians. Are they good or evil? I asked. I don't know, he said. He explained he once saw one standing over the grave of a terrible loan shark, who he said caused the ground to shake as he was buried. Then, he said, they buried a young girl, an angel. About a year ago, they buried a pervert disguised as a religious figure at the end of the cemetery. The night he was buried, the sounds of a storm and screaming came from his grave, but there was no wind. The specter was standing there, keeping everyone away. So, he concluded, it is a being commissioned by God. We haven't seen them cause any harm, except for scaring those new to the job. But Abby, in my dream, that specter was standing over his grave, and my wife was so scared she got up. How do you explain that? I asked. It could be an angel of paradise or a creature of judgment. Both are servants of God. Your wife's fear might just be your own overinterpretation, he said. I felt comfortable that night with old Arthur. The next morning, I had my son's name carved on Chloe's tombstone. Died before birth. Let the memory of my soul remain in the world. I cried looking at the inscription. Later, I went back to work. I saw the grave next to my wife's was covered. I asked the official who was buried. He said, no one was buried, but it was purchased. Memnon Ozal bought it. That's my name, I said. He smiled and said, we collected some money among ourselves and bought it for you, Abby. What? I asked in surprise. You wanted to be buried. You want to be buried there so much. And there is no one else who deserves to be buried there but you, he said. I was overjoyed and cried in old Arthur's arms. To keep you from leaving your wife and unborn baby alone, he said. That night, the grave guardian was at the head of my unburied grave again. The time of death has not yet come, I said. When it does, we will see. I saw the supernatural entities intermittently for another 6 months before I was transferred to another department. I asked my friends not to neglect my wife's grave. Since that day, every time I visit, I look at my wife's grave and the grave where I will lie. I also salute that grave guardian. That's the whole story, friends. Thank you for listening. I love you all very much. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, you can be informed about new videos by subscribing and turning on notifications. See you in new videos. Goodbye.